I don't know if you know this man. He's the most important man in Sri Lanka. He's President Mahinda Rajapaksa. And you see him, and this is just a small poster, but he's been displayed on like absolutely huge posters. He recently got into his his second term as a president, and which was celebrated in a very grand way in Sri Lanka. And Mahinda, he was the president who won the war, and he's been really quite popular among the majority population, the Sinhalese population, for doing this. A lot of people in the different elections that have taken place this year, presidential elections and then parliamentary elections, a lot of people, when you talk to them, they say, well, we're going to vote for Mahinda because he did this, he ended the war for us. So he is usually popular among large parts of the population, not among those who lost, of course, their family members and so in the war that he ran. But the development that we see, apart from Mahinda displaying himself as the main hero and king of Sri Lanka, we see a development where there is more concentration of power in Sri Lanka. When there have been peace talks earlier, and when peace researchers would study, or civil society peace organizations would study the conflict in Sri Lanka and look at what we need to do to solve the conflict, we would tend to talk about devolution of power. We would tend to talk about like how do we share power in this country so that also minorities get some participation and influence. Where Sri Lanka is going now is sort of the other way around, where there's more centralization, where Rajapaksa also puts all his brothers and family members on different positions, so there's a concentration of power also to this particular family. Those who support him are very happy with this, but many people are quite unhappy with also a lot of corruption taking place in the country. There have been, basically there has been a dismantling of the Sri Lankan democracy. Sri Lanka is famous for being, or used to be famous for being like a very early third world democracy that was a very successful democracy. And now you can see that, well, the constitution was recently changed and the president has power, for instance, over the election commission, so you can imagine what's going to happen in the next election. There was already in these last elections a lot of fraud and so on. So it's on the paper it's a democracy, but it's becoming increasingly undemocratic. And the other thing that is continuing, I would have thought that after the war things would get a little bit easier in Sri Lanka for civil society activists, for media, for instance, but it's actually not getting easier because the president is very strongly controlling the media and not accepting anyone criticizing him or his family. So you have journalists being killed, being attacked. Most critical journalists are either decided not to write anything critical or they have left the country. And the same thing with peace activists, human rights activists, for instance. So that is, that's another quite worrying development. Okay, I have two more aspects of post-war Sri Lanka that I want to talk about. This one is about reconciliation. And this is a picture painted outside a school on a wall. They have these nice wall paintings outside a school in a village in eastern Sri Lanka, and it pictures like a nice how all the ethnic groups are coming together with the symbol of peace and all that. But the fact is that there is, as I hinted to before, there's quite a huge gap between the different communities in Sri Lanka after this war, and I would say that it's become a bit worse after the end of the war, because you've had like huge celebrations of the war, or of the victory, and exactly 1 year after the victory, there was, this Heroes Week, the Victory Day parade, that the government decided to have. And some of my Tamil friends, they said that we were actually forced to buy a Sri Lankan flag to put it up outside of our house or outside of our little business that we had. Because otherwise we'll be in trouble, otherwise the police would come and say you need to celebrate. So it's kind of like, I mean, there are many people who genuinely are happy and celebrating, but then there are many people who might have lost their family members in this absolutely terrible battle, and there's no space for mourning. There were some Tamil party and some religious leaders who tried to say that, okay, but we need to have a day of mourning, we have to mourn the dead on this day rather than celebrate. And they were not even allowed, I mean, they had some problems to be able to just make a simple like ceremony in church or so. So that's, I mean, that's a big divide there. I don't know if I'm running out of time now, maybe I should, yeah, I will just take a couple of minutes more, but I mean, just another point is also to do with impunity and like justice here in the conflict, because throughout 26 years of war, hardly anyone has been punished for anything they have done. So many people have been killed and nobody punished. So a big question now is, so are people going to be, I mean, is anyone going to look into this? Who was responsible for killing all these innocent people throughout all these years? And the UN and international actors have become a little bit nervous, saying like, we can't, I mean, Sri Lanka is setting a bad example. There were really terrible human rights violations in Sri Lanka, and no one is punished. So there have been some attempts from the UN to put pressure to investigate what happened in the end of the war. But the Sri Lankan government has obviously been quite not so interested, because they have won the war and they are happy and they don't want to dig deeper into what happened and who did something wrong. So that's another cause for worry, maybe. And even to talk about reconciliation is quite. I spoke, what was it, last week with some civil society activists. He said we can't do any programs called peace building or reconciliation, because that's not a good word to use. It's a sensitive word to use in Sri Lanka today. So that is, I mean, that is the situation when it comes to working on justice and reconciliation. Okay, so last point is so last point is about economic development and reconstruction of the war-torn area. And here is, I mean, if the Sri Lankan government is not so interested in the other three aspects of post-war conflict prevention, at least they are making an absolutely huge effort on economic development and reconstruction. And I think this can be quite hopeful. I mean, this is maybe the hope that at least people who were affected by war, they will be able to rebuild their lives, they will be able to get a better situation now that the war is no longer there. So there's a lot of potential here for conflict prevention, maybe. But then again, sorry for only coming with bad news, but again, it's a process which is very centralized. Instead of people participating locally, deciding what sort of development do we want, it's very concentrated around the central government and the president. Oops. I just took this one, is from the southern part. There are all these like nice posters on development, where you have the president helping a little child and you have his brothers on the picture as well, and very much of the power over economic development is in the hand of the president and his family, and there's also concern of who gets the development. This picture is from Hambantota, that's the district in the south where the president is from, and that's where the huge development takes place. Whereas in the north and east, a lot of things are happening, but there is also a big worry that Sinhalese people are moving into these areas that were Tamil areas from the beginning, maybe as a strategy to make them more mixed and to make Tamils not dominate those areas. So there is a big worry there as well. So development can be, I mean, it's a double-edged sword where it can be helpful really uplift people's lives and really prevent conflicts in the future, but it can also cause a lot of conflicts. So just to end, yes, the war is over in Sri Lanka, but the peace that is emerging is a very particular peace that is very much it's very related to how the war ended, with the victory of one side. So the peace is very uneven. It's a peace with the domination of the president, it's a peace with the domination of maybe the Sinhalese over the Tamils, and that is, and the question is, and we don't know, is this going to be a permanent peace or not? There are certainly people who are unhappy. It doesn't look like there will be a new armed rebellion, because it's basically too militarized and too controlled for that. But it's definitely not a peace where everyone is happy and where people are moving forward in some sort of like spirit of collaboration and so. But we will see what will happen, and I'm curious to hear what Peter has to say now.